In this lesson, we're going to start working with our class definition files and start adding some actual code to our application. Before I jump into that, I want to touch briefly on what a class is. It's too big of a concept to cover to explain completely. So if you aren't familiar with classes and object-oriented programming, I'd recommend just doing a bit of a Google search on that and reading up a little bit. But essentially, a class is a blueprint to create an object. And so what this is for our homepage component. So we're going to use this class to define things like variables and functions that we're going to make use of in that page. So you can see first that we're importing some things here. I'm going to get rid of that space because it's annoying me. We import the component, of course, because we're using the component decorator here, and that comes from the Angular library. And then we're also importing the nav controller, which is from the Ionic library, and that's going to allow us to control navigation in our application. So we have export class homepage here, so that creates the homepage class, and the export keyword is used here so that we can then import that homepage somewhere else. So if we go back to the app.component.ts file, you'll see that we're importing that here. So because we export the class here, we can import it into that other file as well. We have our constructor function here, and this is a special function that will run immediately. And there's also an IonView did load function that you can use, which is very similar to the constructor. It'll run straight away, but it's best to do any sort of heavy lifting, any coding that you want to do within the IonView did load function rather than the constructor. We can also add in some member variables to the class. So if we wanted to set up just some dummy data for now to represent to-dos that we're going to add to the application, we could create a to-dos variable here, and then we want to give it a type. And types are something that are introduced by TypeScript. And again, if this is something that's a little bit unfamiliar to you, you might want to do a bit of a Google, see what it's all about, or read about it in the book. But essentially, we can give this variable a type, the type of data that we expect it to be. So I can just give it a type of any, and then that will say this variable can have any type of data in it. So if I did to-dos any equals just an empty array, that's fine, or I could make it a string, that would be fine too. But then if I change this type to be a string instead, now it expects that variable to be a string, and since it's an array, it's going to complain about that when I try to build the application. But if I change that to a string, now everything's fine again. So for our to-dos, we're just going to give it an any type, and we're not going to assign any value to it yet. I'm just going to do that in the constructor because I think it looks a little bit neater. So we can do this.todos, because we've defined that above the constructor, that sets it up as a member variable, meaning that it is accessible anywhere throughout the class through this.todos, which is different to a variable we define elsewhere in the class. If I was to define to-dos here, then that's only accessible within this function. I couldn't then reference it up here. So a member variable can be accessed from anywhere within the class. So now I can set this.todos to equal an object, an array rather. It's going to be an array of objects. And then the objects within this array are going to represent our to-dos. So I'll just call that to-do 1, and also give it a description of ABC. So I'm going to copy that out a few times so we have a little bit of data to work with, and just number these appropriately. And now we have some data to work with within this file, which we can then grab in our templates, which I'll get into in the next lesson. And so you may also notice this weird thing in the constructor here. So what this is doing is dependency injection. So what we're saying is we want to have a member variable called nav control here, and we've given it a type, just like we gave to-dos a type of any, we've given this a type of nav controller. And this is a bit of a special case because it uses that to know that we want nav control to reference this nav controller. So now anywhere throughout this class, I can access nav controller by doing this dot nav control, and then I can access whatever methods that makes available to us. This is because we have the public keyword in front of it. If I were to get rid of public, then the nav control would only be accessible within the constructor. We can also add some of our own functions to this class that we can then call from our template, for example, or from within this class. We're going to create two functions, an add to do function, and we're going to create an edit to do function as well. And in the edit to do function, we're eventually going to pass a to do into that. So we set up the parameter there for later. But for now, we're just going to add some console.log statements here that will say to do, finish add to do, and we'll also add that to the edit to do as well, because we'll be implementing these in another lesson. So what we will do eventually is make this add to do function launch that edit to do page we created. And the edit to do function is also going to launch that same edit to do page. And we're just going to have a bit of logic in there to detect whether we are creating a new to do or whether we're going to edit an existing to do. So let's jump into the edit to do page now. And we're going to set this up a little bit as well. So let's get rid of that comment there and this one as well. So just like in the home page, we're going to create a member variable here to hold a single to-do this time. So rather than to-dos, we're just going to have a single to-do file, member variable rather. And we're going to give that a type of any. And then in our constructor, we're just going to set that to be an empty object for now. So we'll give it a title of blank and a description of blank. So this is going to play into that functionality I talked about where we're going to use this page for both editing and creating new to-dos. So in the case where we're creating a new to-do, we want to have this blank to-do object so that our template doesn't complain about the to-do's title and description not existing. You'll see how that pans out in the next lesson. As well as creating that object, we're also going to create a save function, which we're going to call from our template when we're done adding the to-do. But again, we're just going to add a console log statement here saying to finish save function. So we've added a few things now, so let's just check that we haven't broken anything. Bring up the terminal, doesn't seem to be any problems in there. Bring up application, still running fine. So we haven't really done anything that's made any visible changes yet, but we've set up both of our classes, set up some dummy data that we're going to be able to work with, and in the following lessons we're going to actually start doing some more interesting stuff with that.